video. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 9th day of Hello India online physical education and community coaching program. Today, we are fortunate to have an eminent speaker, Dr. George Matthews, Associate Professor, SAI LNCPE, Trivandrum, with us. Sir will be delivering a talk on safe environment to protect, safeguard children, first aid. To have a brief introduction about George sir, Dr. George Matthews, sir, with a 32 years of teaching experience and serve as a formerly faculty of Christian Medical College, Vellore. Sir's professional qualifications are MBBS, DPMR, DNB, MPhil in clinical epidemiology, and he also had a higher training in sports medicine and biomechanics from USA. So, on behalf of SAI LNCPE, Ministry of Youth Affairs and Sports, Hello India, and on my personal behalf, I extend a warm welcome to the program, you sir.
Thank you, Amal.
I also welcome all the PE teachers for the session. Over to you, sir, please.
Thank you. Let us start the presentation right away. This presentation is about safety. Safety in sports, which includes safe environment also, that we are dealing with in a sports field. Plus the first aid, that is the response of the teacher or the coach on the field side is what is meant by first aid here. This is very important to prevent worsening of the injury and also to prevent complications that can be prevented on the field and to arrange appropriate transportation to the hospital. At the outset, I want to clarify some of the terms. I hope you know the meaning, but yet we should have a review of that. What is meant by safety? What is meant by cause? What is meant by a risk factor? And then there are legal terms called liability. There is something called as negligence. You'll be reading in the newspapers about negligence being punished by the courts. So as teachers, what are the areas that are within your ambit, which will come under liability, and how can this be related to a punishable offense called negligence? The first, what is meant by safety? I need not define it. All of us understand the meaning of this term. So safety is trying to prevent harm or danger as far as possible in different areas that you find in sport. It could be related to the equipment, it could be related to the playing field, it could be related to the rules of the game, it could be related to injury prevention and response to injury. In all these areas, we need to prioritize safety so that the participants, and in schools, these are going to be children, and colleges, college students, the adolescents who participate in sport and need not get injured at all. So safety is paramount, and that is how we proceed in every field, not just in sports. Safety is prioritized and all preventive measures are taken to prevent harm. The second term that I would like to define is what is meant by a cause. The cause of an injury. Let's say somebody is suffering an accident on the roads, a bike accident, and there is a collision between a bike and a car. And the cause of the injuries that this person would suffer is the collision. And so then what is a risk factor? What is the difference between a cause and a risk factor? Risk factors are factors which you can identify and correct so that a causation of an injury or causation of an accident is prevented. For example, in the bike accident case, risk factors are overspeeding, violation of rules, absence of protective equipment. In this case, it would be the helmet. use of alcohol by the driver or the drivers, and so on and so forth. So the risk factors which will prevent a bike accident on the roads can be tackled, prevented by rules, prevented by the changes in the civic sense of the citizens, or what we call as the behavior. Behavioral changes can bring in a lot of changes in risk factors. So in sports also there are risk factors, and these risk factors must be tackled so that the injuries can be prevented. If the risk factors are ignored, these become the causes of accidents, causes of injuries in sports, or any sort of damage. Another example, let's say a person is playing in the very hot sun, and the person gets dehydrated and gets some kind of illness. So the heat is a risk factor which can be tackled to prevent heat illness. If you don't tackle the risk factor, that becomes a cause for the heat illness. So this is to be remembered. In every field or in every aspect of sports participation, whether it be in training or competition, these risk factors have to be curtailed. And after risk factors, what should be the most important thing to understand? What is meant by liability, and how is it related to negligence? Liability is, of course, a legal term. Liability means your obligation, your responsibility to do your duties. As teachers, your liabilities do not just rest on your duties of teaching or coaching. There are other duties. You have to take care of the safety of your wards, of your students, of your trainees. You have to ensure proper first aid on the field. These are all your liabilities. So obligations and the responsibilities that a teacher must take on as he accepts a job of physical education teacher in a school or a college are sometimes unstated or unseen. They may not be explicitly stated in the appointment order. Nobody would say that you have to take care of safety or you have to give first aid. All that the appointment order would state is that you are going to be appointed as a physical education teacher in a school. And along with the job, there are liabilities. And each of you, please remember this. There are many liabilities that are attached to the post of a physical education teacher, because unlike teaching other subjects, this involves physical activities where there are risks of injuries. And these injuries have to be mitigated and risk factors corrected. So when the liabilities are ignored, when the liabilities are neglected, we call that as negligence. So negligence is when we are not providing adequate care or reasonable care. Your response in a situation can be assessed, and a report can be filed by somebody from the school, from your superiors in school, or by the district education officer, or from the medical officer of the district where you have mismanaged the first aid in an injury. So your liabilities are not as simple as just taking a class and going away. You cannot be negligent. Negligence, again, I will tell you, negligence means not providing adequate care, not providing reasonable care within your ability. You're not supposed to treat a sports injury. That is not within your ability. What is expected is to provide correct first aid and arrange the correct transportation of an injured person to the hospital. There are teachers who attempt to reduce a dislocation on the field by themselves. For example, the shoulder is dislocated, somebody will pull and try to put it in. What you are doing is what you are not supposed to do. You are doing that something that you are not trained to do. You are doing something that you are not licensed to perform. And in this case, if something occurs, some damage occurs to the body, you can be caught as a negligent person, and the court can, in fact, award you the punishment, can be a monetary punishment or a term in jail. So don't do unnecessary things on the field. You are not expected to correct a dislocation. or straighten out a fractured limb. That is not what you're trained for or what you're appointed for. You have to give the proper first aid for a dislocated or a fractured limb and then transfer the patient to the hospital. So negligence can be doing unnecessary things, thinking that nobody is going to question you. So that is, if at all this has happened, these are things of the past. Now people are very aware of their rights. The parents are going to complain that you have overdone things or you have not done it at all. So negligence can be either way. You are ignored the law, ignored the rules of the country in providing first aid, or taken on as your responsibility of providing care that you are not supposed to do or you are not qualified to perform. So negligence is very serious. It can affect your career. It can land you in jail. It can actually bring down your career options, because one school will give definitely weightage to what the other school would say when you leave that school and join their school. So there, your past, your precedence in the previous schools, your reference from the other schools are going to be important in your profession. And in government service, any wrong thing can result in loss of a job. You can be dismissed from service. So negligence can also mean that you ignore the safety of the children in other areas. There can be physical abuse, there can be sexual abuse, there can be child abuse when in children who come for sports classes. It is your responsibility to take care of the safety of the children, to prevent child abuse, physical abuse on the field. Giving punishments is physical abuse, sexual abuse to be prevented, and the child has to be protected like your own child. So safety involves many other areas also. When we go on to the actual safety areas, most of the things you know. So I'm going to quickly go through the slides and take time to explain the medical aspects of sports injuries first aid. So there are many areas that you can see in the main list here. There is something is sports safety, which is sports specific. Each sport has its rules about equipment, about field, about protective wear, about the playing time, the rest periods. Water safety, very important. If it is not taken care of, a child can drown. Playground safety, concussion. Concussion is the damage to the brain which can affect the function temporarily. A little more about it in a later slide. Then fall safety. Most children, almost everybody falls while they are taking part in sport. But we must make sure that there are no serious injuries due to these falls. Helmet safety, bicycle safety, these are common areas which people get injured in. That is why bicycle safety is very specifically mentioned, so also the helmet. Helmet safety, now helmet is mandatory for some sport. Helmet is mandatory for bikes and helmets. There are specific cycling helmets which are mandatory for cycling, even recreational or transportational cycling on the roads. When there are many concerns regarding the safety, all these listed 6 areas you know. You have to prepare the kids for the sport, you have to allow them to warm up, and later you have to cool down properly. Appropriate sports wear, sports equipments, sports shoes. Give the proper period of rest. And as a coach or a physical education teacher, you have to be prepared properly. That means you have to have the appropriate knowledge, appropriate skills, the appropriate managerial skills also, because you have to manage several aspects in the school. And then if you are a parent of the child, you have to be a supportive parent, taking the coach into confidence and having a proper rapport with the coach. And make sure as teachers that you establish a good rapport with the parent, so that the parent can tell you what is wrong with the child, if at all there is a medical problem, and which should be kept confidential. Again, I would like to stress this point. Suppose a parent reveals a medical condition of the athlete. It is your responsibility to keep it confidential, without announcing it in class, telling other teachers who need not know about it. The principal might know about it. You might know about it, about a person's, let's say, heart disease. A child is born with a heart disease and the child is not fit for sport. The the parent comes and tells you, as a teacher, you have to maintain confidentiality of this information. It is paramount. You should understand that if you break this confidentiality contract, you can be punished. There are many ways you prepare the demands of the sport that you as teachers know much better than I do. So it is very easy for you to conceptualize this even without me showing this slide. There are warm-up stretches before the game. These are all protective, and wearing appropriate sports gear, sport-specific protective equipment are available, which you can utilize according to the budget available in the school. I hope you understand why I'm rushing through these slides. I do not want to stress on all these areas which you already know. And if I stress on these areas, I will not get time to give you the proper first aid measures. Now, this is something that I will spend some time on. What is known as concussion? See, the brain, which is housed inside the skull. We have a skull which is a protective structure that houses the brain inside, which is a very soft structure. And the brain is suspended in a fluid called as cerebrospinal fluid, which cushions it and also reduces the shock as we move. But when there is a sudden hit on the head, or the person falls on the ground and hits his head on the ground, the brain will move back and forth, hitting against the inside bone, that is the inside part of the skull, where the soft brain gets damaged by the hard impact against the inner aspect of the skull. You can see in this areas that after a sudden impact on the back of the head, not only is there an injury to the back of the brain, but also there is an injury in the front area of the brain, because the brain keeps shaking forwards and backwards depending on the acceleration, deceleration force that has been produced by the impact. So it at least occurs once or twice, and so it produces the damage to two different areas. So concussions, by definition, are temporary dysfunctions of brain. When the brain is having a dysfunction, it cannot perform its functions as in a normal person. Temporarily, that is called as concussion. So what happens when the brain stops functioning properly? The brain is what keeps us awake, what gives us memory, what gives us judgment, what gives us what you call as the orientation to time and space. If a person who gets up after a collision and an impact on the head, the first thing he's going to ask is, what happened to me? What has happened to me? He does not remember the collision. He does not remember the impact to the head. He has lost his memory before the impact. So what is called as the retrograde loss of memory. So he does not remember the accident that produced the head injury. He cannot remember anything. He just remembers playing football, but he does not remember having a collision, tackling with another opponent, and then the impact, and he may be becoming unconscious for a short period. So the loss of memory is one indication of concussion. Second thing, they lose the orientation to time and space. They will not be able to sometimes locate where they are. If you ask them, where are you playing? They will not answer. If you ask them the date, what day is today? They will not be able to say which day of the week it is. They will not remember the date. Some of them just forget the year also. That is, of course, temporary. They will not remember why they came to this place. They will not remember what they had for lunch or breakfast. They will not remember their friends' names. They might remember their name. They will not be able to remember the names of their teams. So all this indicates loss of memory. At the same time, there will be sometimes severe headache. There will be dizziness. The person will feel giddy. The person cannot stand up straight. person will not be able to use his mental functions like simple calculations or judgment. All that the brain does is temporarily stopped. So this indicates that the brain was damaged due to the shake that occurred. And this demands rest. Immediately the person must be withdrawn from the field and, if required, taken to the hospital. He should not be allowed to play. A person who has had a concussion is going to get more serious problems as time passes. He should not be allowed to play. What are the changes that occur in the brain after the impact? After the impact, what you can find is the brain swells. The brain gets swollen. Because there will be swelling, the brain will get swelling, just like you get swelling in the joints when you are injured in the joints. The brain starts swelling, there is no space inside the skull, and the brain gets more and more impaired. It gets more and more serious, and sometimes very serious consequences. Some of them get fits. Fits indicates brain damage, which should not be ignored. A person having fits should definitely go to the hospital immediately. This all indicates brain damage that is not serious, that is not minor. The fits indicate that the damage is significant enough to produce abnormal electric activity in the brain. So a person should be observed for at least 24 to 48 hours after concussion has occurred for the danger signs that can develop. As the brain swelling worsens, or when there is bleeding in the brain or outside the brain, there will be more symptoms like vomiting or nausea. There can be blurring of vision. There can be fits. The person will lose memory, not just backwards, it also lose what you call as antegrade. At the moment of injury to the next few days, he will not remember anything. He cannot concentrate on anything. He will not even concentrate on the question that you are asking. So these are all the danger signs, and the person has to be taken to hospital. These people should not be managed in the school or in the hostels. This is where your negligence could be a problem. Do not take chances with the brain. That is what the title of the slide says. The brain can go into very serious situation in a matter of minutes. If the person is not in a hospital, you will not be able to do anything to save the patient. So a head injury, whether or not you think is serious, or it should be attended to by a doctor. So that is what the message regarding this slide. Rest is very important. Many a time rest is ignored. Without rest, nobody will recover for the next session or for the next day's training. Rest should be prioritized, especially for children. They need to have adequate sleep for growing and for recouping their body systems. They need to sleep, they need to eat well, they need to sleep, they need to do their academic work. Then they have to play. So there is no point in trying to keep them on the field for very long periods, trying to improve their skill and fitness. Hydration is very important, especially in a country like India, where the summers can be very hot. Hydration is important. And if you are not hydrated, the children are not hydrated properly, they will definitely go into dehydration, and very quickly they will be having the symptoms of dehydration. Unfortunately, in many schools of the country, the children are made to play with shirts and ties, neckties, closing of the collar area, which allows the heat to remain inside the shirt, and that will increase the risk of heat illness. So here is the word risk being used again. The risk of heat illness increases when you are dehydrated, when your attire is not proper. If the sportswear is not used, they are tying a tight necktie and then participating in sport, they will definitely get a heat illness very soon. They must have drinks interval adequately. They must remain in the shade as far as possible. And when on a very hot day, it's better to avoid outdoor classes. So these risk factors can be mitigated and prevent heat illnesses from developing. Playground safety, I will not linger on this slide in more than a few seconds, because this is something that you need to know. I don't have to tell you what are the safety measures that you have to take on the playground. Water safety is important in terms of the steps that you take but also the steps that you have to take when an accident occurs. Any accident in water sports has the greatest danger of drowning occurring in the participants. Drowning, you have to be careful when you look at the person in water. You have to keep tagging them. They need to be properly supervised and observed, and they should be taken out of water if they show signs of fatigue or if they are unable to cope up with that swimming or water sport event. Please be very, very careful. Don't let the students be pushed into remaining in water, trying to attempt to improve their swimming at one go. Water safety is paramount, should not be ignored. Play by the rules. Rules are, of course, maintained, are framed to maintain safety in sports. And if you allow violation of rules, flouting of rules, you're going to be in trouble. So it's about half an hour into the lecture. I think now it's time to go into the first aid for different injuries. That is what I think you will also expect from me. When injury occurs, you should have to be careful, because once you are injured, you should not be taking steps to put the person back in the sport. The person, in fact, should be rested. So let's first go into the CPR, which is the most important first aid that somebody can offer, because this is a life-saving procedure known as CPR. CPR means cardiopulmonary resuscitation. Of course, this is a very simple slide. All of you know this. This is known as, the acronym is known as RICE. Somebody would call it RICE. Rest, ice, compression, elevation. So RICE is the acronym to remember the first aid for musculoskeletal injuries. Rest for the injured part. When we say rest, it doesn't mean bed rest. It only means rest for the injured part. Ice on the injured area, compression, bandaging, and elevation on the first 1 or 2 days to prevent swelling from collecting in the injured area. Now, cardiopulmonary resuscitation, CPR. If you go through the steps of CPR, it's always easy to remember if you know the first 3 letters of the English alphabet, A, B, C. Airway is here. And second is breathing, and the next slide you'll find the C called circulation. Now, before you start CPR, the most important thing is to check whether the person is really unconscious and not having a heartbeat and breathing pattern. Never ever attempt to give CPR to a person who's having a heartbeat or is breathing. So first you have to ensure that the person is indeed unconscious or unresponsive, non-responsive, and lying on the field requiring help. Can you see this mannequin? Yes, I think you can. And when the most important thing to remember is to wake up. If this person has fainted, you're trying to wake him up. When you wake up a person who's unconscious, do not ever shake him like this, which will damage his neck and spine. Don't shake him. Don't pull him up by his hands. Don't lift him. The only thing that you have to do is tap on his shoulders, which will not shake his body. Tap on his shoulders, or even slap so that it is painful. You can slap on the shoulder, either shoulder, and slap on either of the shoulders to wake him up. And if you know his name, you call him by his name. We'll see whether he's responding. If he is not responding, the first step is to do the A part of it, that is airway. When the person is unconscious on the ground, especially on his back, you have to remember that the tongue can fall backwards into the throat and block the airway. So the airway has to be opened by a very simple technique known as the chin lift. The chin lift is done with the 2 hands as seen in the second picture. You can hold one hand here, the other hand under the chin, and tilt the chin upwards. So here in this mannequin, it is like this. This is the wrong position. It should go up like this. That means the chin should be pointing upwards towards the roof or towards the sky. This is the open airway position. This will open the passageway for the air, the back of the throat, so that the person will be able to breathe. And if the person has started breathing, that is very good. If he has not, you have to check whether the person is breathing. To check that, you simultaneously use your eyes, your ears, and the skin of your cheek to check. You look at the chest with the eyes. You are looking at the chest to look for movements, breathing movements. You can hear the sound of the air coming from the nose by keeping the ear closed, and also you can feel the air hitting the side of your cheek. So you are look, listen, feel. Three done simultaneously to check for breathing. If the person is not breathing, you have to administer artificial breathing. Keep the nostrils closed, keep the chin lifted, the airway is open, and you use your mouth to seal your lips around the portion of the person's mouth, and then forcefully exhale from your lungs into the person's lungs, and each exhalation should last for 1 second. It is not the way of giving artificial respiration, is not the pattern of whoo, whoo, like that, or not like blowing up a balloon. All that you have to do is to do, keep your lips open and do. So this ha movement is what is expected, but I give you a warning here. Do not give mouth-to-mouth respiration to strangers. You don't know why the person has fainted. You may not know whether the person has an infectious disease like COVID. So this is not done in hospitals. We use equipment to give artificial breathing. But for somebody who's very close to you, somebody dear to you, you can give this first aid. Administering chest compressions. C is for chest compression or the managing the circulation. Here you have to use the middle of the chest, especially the lower end of the chest. Keep the heel of your hand on that. This is the heel of the hand. This is the portion which will transmit the force onto the person's chest. And keep the other hand over the first hand. Lock your fingers and keep your heel of the hand on the middle of the chest. And look at this, the elbows should not be bent, the elbows should be locked, so that when you lean forward and press and pump, your elbows are not bending and straightening. The elbows are more or less locked, so that the entire force of your body thrust is transmitted into the person's chest, so that the chest moves up and down. When the chest moves up and down, the heart inside gets compressed, and this mechanical pumping will move blood to the brain at least. So the rate of giving this is 100 compressions per minute. That is the rate. And the way it is given, there is a way of doing it. You give 30 compressions. And after 30 compressions, you stop the compressions and give 2 minutes of artificial respiration. So not 2 minutes, sorry, 2 artificial breaths. 1 second each. 1 second each, and then give 30 compressions. That it keep the cycle keeps repeating until help arrives or the person is revived. Now there is something that you have to remember always. When a person does not require CPR, but a person is unconscious, he doesn't require CPR, and the person is unconscious, he should be allowed to sleep on his side, to rest on his side, not on his side, not on his back. So this position, the first picture is the position which you find him. You cannot keep him like that. If you keep him like that in an unconscious person, the fluids, the saliva, the secretions from the nose, everything will flow into his lungs, which are not good. So you have to put him into the third position as seen in the bottom part of the slide by turning the body as one unit without twisting the back using your hands. And this is known as the recovery position. So any person who is recovering after a collapse on the field or after fainting, or is just recovering from a very long endurance run, put him in the recovery position rather than on his back. And when you have the recovery position, the person will be able to breathe, and the fluids in the mouth will flow out rather than flowing back into the lungs. So this is the purpose of getting this recovery position. Now, this is the description of the recovery position, which does not actually is mandated here. CBS can look at the picture and remember that. You sit on one side, hold the opposite hand and opposite knee, and move it as one unit, tilting or rotating the body onto your side and keeping the top knee bent and the top elbow bent and the hand under the head like the pillow for the person. And the bottom hand is here bent at 90 degrees and the bottom leg is straight. This is the recovery position. Once again, what is the advantage of recovery position? It will prevent vomitus, any stomach content that is vomited, or the saliva, or the nasal secretion from flowing back into the lungs and producing serious problems in the unconscious person. So recovery position will allow all this fluid to flow out rather than flowing into the lungs. The first aid for near drowning. In water safety, you must know persons can be recovered from the water, rescued from the water before they drown. This is what we call as near drowning. And if the person is not having any breathing or heartbeats, you have to do the CPR and ship the person to the hospital immediately. But if the person has been easily saved, breathing, pulse is present, the person goes into the recovery position for expecting the ambulance to arrive or the vehicle to arrive for transportation. So when the person is already having a breathing pattern and a pulse or a heartbeat, you need not give CPR. What is the first aid for fits? Many people still believe that when somebody is having fits, we should put some metal object like keys into the palm and make him grip the metal object, or make him bite on the metal keys. This is wrong. This should never be done. This will produce injuries and sometimes even fractures. All that you have to do, the person should be moved to safety, and then do not put anything into the mouth. Just keep the person in the recovery position. So recovery position is very important for a person with first aid. For an unconscious athlete, you evaluate the patient in the position in which you find the person, manage the airway, breathing, circulation, and very, very important, transport safely. An unconscious person should be transported as if this person is having a spinal injury. Please remember that this unconscious person could have been hit on his back or head or on his neck, and so he must have suffered a spine injury also. So it may not be a problem in this head alone, it could be a spinal injury. So you transport the person without twisting his body by using a technique known as the log roll technique of making the person lying flat on a board known as the spine board without twisting his spine at all, and transportation is arranged with the spine board. For a person to be put into this log roll position and shifted on a spine board, you have to have at least 3 persons on a team. 4 persons would be ideal. And 4 persons, 1 person supporting the head, the other 3 persons supporting the body, moving the person as a log of, like moving a log of wood. And that is where you have to be utmostly careful. As if this is there, you should never twist the body, head in one direction and the body in another direction. No, this is, you have to move this body as if it is one rigid piece, and you turn in one movement. You turn both the lower body, upper body, neck and head to one side or back to the supine position. So this turning, what is known as the log rolling, which we are utilizing in the spine under transportation onto the spine board. Controlling bleeding, which all of us would have experienced, very minor procedure of applying pressure. Sometimes the bleeding is so heavy that application of pressure would not by itself stop the bleeding. So that you have to give the effect of gravity to reduce the bleeding. As you know, gravity pulls the blood downwards, reducing the speed of flow inside the vessels. So if you can lift the injured, for example, the hand is injured, if you can lift the hand and keep it upwards, the gravity will keep pulling the blood downwards from the vessels. So the flow speed is reduced and the bleeding will reduce very quickly. Along with that, you apply direct pressure. And first aid for bleeding nose, again, many people give the wrong first aid. There is only one correct method for giving first aid for a bleeding nose in a conscious patient, and that technique is pinch the nostrils, close the nostrils by pinching the nostrils. If you pinch both the nostrils and the person opens his mouth and breathes through the mouth, the nostrils are pinched, the mouth is open, and then he leans forward. He leans forward, remains in the leaning forward position for 3 to 5 minutes till the bleeding has stopped. Sometimes this procedure may have to be repeated for one more time. If in spite of repeating it once more, the bleeding is continuing, the person has to be shifted to the hospital immediately because there could be some other serious bleeding inside. So this is the first aid for a person who is bleeding but is conscious. But if the person is unconscious on the ground, no response, but is bleeding from the nose, it means that the person is having a head injury. And this bleeding is coming from inside his skull. So this person has to be shifted immediately without attempting any first aid to stop the bleeding. Because the bleeding will not stop and you cannot keep the unconscious person sitting up, or you cannot keep the unconscious person, make the unconscious person lean forward. So an unconscious person bleeding from the nose has a head injury, take him to the hospital immediately. There are many roles that a coach and a parent must take. I am not going to elaborate or enumerate any of this. You know, that is the responsibility of the coach or a teacher in the school or in the college or in the community to make sport very safe. And it's a responsibility of the parent to take the coach into confidence, have the proper rapport with the coach, and have reasonable expectations when a child goes for training. Do not expect a child to be in the Olympics in 1 year when you send him for the initially for the training. So have realistic expectations, and the coach also must remember that this child in front of you, this training in front of you is somebody's precious child at home. And this precious child should be more precious than your children. You take care of the child as if they are more precious than your children, because it is your responsibility until this playing time is over that they are allowed to play in a very safe way. Having said this and having gone through 45 minutes of my presentation, I'm coming to some real life situations and I'm giving you questions. I don't want you to answer the questions. I want you to think on these questions, find the answers, and that I'll help you to understand how safety is important and whether safety rules were flouted in this. This is case number 1. You can see a boy lying on the ground. Obviously unconscious. And you can see something else on the field. What is this? This is a hammer. In a hammer throw, the hammer is here. The child, the boy is here. It is an injury. It is an accident. What has occurred? I'll give you the situation. It happened last year. A volunteer for the hammer throw event, enlisted by the school teachers. One of the students who was not participating asked to report for some event, not a school event, but something that the school was organizing, a district event, sport athletic event, where a boy was asked to volunteer. His job was to carry back the hammer that was thrown. After the measurement was taken, the hammer had to be taken back to the circle. And this is the boy who was there, or one of the boys who was there. It's not alone. So here is a volunteer who has been struck by a hammer. And the hammer hit him hard on the head and the person fell unconscious. Of course, you can imagine the impact of a hammer that is thrown at full force. just before landing. It is very, very pathetic, or I think very sad to think that a boy who was volunteering, trying to help, had to suffer a serious injury. Now, my question to you: what is the liability of the organizers? This lecture is about sports safety. I'm not going into the first state here first. What is the liability? Should this injury have occurred? Should this minor, this is a minor student, he's a legally minor student. He cannot take decisions, he's below 18 years. Can this 18-year-old boy be a volunteer in a tournament? Did he participate because he was willing, or did he participate afraid of his teachers because they told him to participate? Did the teacher ensure some discipline was enforced here to make sure that the boy came from his home? Were his parents willing for him to be a volunteer? Was volunteer safety taken care of? Was he instructed how to behave on a hammer throw sector field? Did he know about other athletic events going on? Was he asked to volunteer for some other event also? Was he warned that the hammer was coming? Did he have time to escape? Should he have been put in such a dangerous situation rather than a teacher taking up? Did the teacher think that this dangerous situation could be handled to a student, and the teacher sits at the scoring point? So many questions I have asked. I hope you have found the answers to this, or you are thinking about answers to this. I know you don't know the answers to many of these questions, but are you asking the same questions after looking at this picture? If this were your child, how would you behave to this situation? This is most tragic. This should not have occurred. Here is a person lying unconscious. This boy eventually died in hospital. A young individual's life cut short by this kind of management. Is it negligence? Is it punishable? Who is responsible? The teacher, the organizers, the parent who allowed him to go, the child who came so-called voluntarily? Is he trained to be a participant? Is he trained to be a volunteer? What were safety measures were taken? No. Now we go on to the second picture of the same boy. You can see this boy being carried out. How many are there? 4 people. So now we go to the portion after the injury has occurred. The response after injury has occurred. Whether the injury should have occurred or not is an entirely different area, but I have asked questions about that in the first slide. This is the slide on which I'm going to ask you questions. Is this the proper way of carrying an injured child? Did this carrying method worsen this child's injury? Could the death of this child have been caused by the carrying method? Is the main person who has got most of the boy's body in his arms trained to do first aid? Did he follow first aid principles? Was he given first aid duty on the field? What are the other 3 people's duties? Are these students or organizers? Were they trained by the committee to carry out first aid? Is there somebody giving instruction how to carry the child? Is there not even a stretcher on this major competition as an inter-district competition? So many questions. As you keep looking at the picture, many more questions come to my mind. I'll stop with this because we don't have a lot of time. Where is safety in this competition? Where is first aid procedure followed? Is there negligence? Is this person the organizer or just a standby person, or what do you call a bystander, or a passerby, or a volunteer has jumped in to help? Can a volunteer from the spectator side rush in and give first aid? What is the liability of the committee here? Is there an ambulance on the field? Are they trained people to give first aid? So many questions. Unfortunately, this boy died in hospital. What is the cause of his death? Whether is it due to the thing, I will not say because I have not seen the postmortem report. The tragic part is the boy died. So whose fault was it? You tell me whose fault is it? Here is another international football event. You can see that this blue number 12's foot is getting fractured. Can this be prevented? Could this have been prevented by the referee? This is a question I am asking you. This is a tackling which has occurred, of course, without any warning. Is there ignorance of the law here? Is there a violation of any football rules here? Is there a negligence on the part of the referee? Is there a fouling committed by any of these people? Is the person committing the foul who's getting the injury, or is the person committing the foul of another team? So with one single frame, you are unable to answer this. I know that even I am unable to give the answer to my own questions, but I want you to think. The only purpose of this thing is to think. Could this injury have been prevented by a very vigilant referee? The third picture. Let's look at an elbow dislocation occurring in weightlifting. Is there any amount of negligence on the part of the organizers? That is what I am asking you now. When the person wants to lift a particular weight, by the rules of weightlifting, can the organizers allow this weight to be lifted? I know you know the answer. Is there any way that negligence has occurred? Is there a need for this event? Is there a need of spotters for this event? You should be answering the question. I don't know the answer to that. Is this an event where spotters are not allowed? Is it the participant's own responsibility in lifting only manageable weights with the proper technique to prevent injuries? So these are the questions that this will evoke in my mind, and more questions might be evoked in your minds. But now look at number 4. I hope you're able to understand the picture or grasp what is happening. Here is a participant with a javelin impinging on his back. This participant was warming up for his long jump, and the javelin came from behind, penetrated his chest, and his internal organs were damaged. Is it negligence? Will a javelin usually reach the long jump area? Can a long jump be conducted during a javelin event? Was there somebody to look at this javelin throw and warn the jumpers? Was there any serious violation of the rules? Were the basic track and field rules violated here? This could have killed the person. Fortunately, he escaped because he was in a major city where there was a hospital which could operate on him and save his life. So you should be having the answers in your mind. I know that many of you are having the answers to my questions. From the throwing sector, the javelin. Where all can the javelin travel? And what all precautions should be taken on an athletic field before an event should be conducted. If you think this happens only in international events where the javelin can be thrown very far, look at this. This happened in India. A school annual sports day in a school. Old bamboo javelin went through the head of this poor child. Look at him lying on the stretcher, helpless, with his javelin penetrating his skull and brain. His life was saved, but unfortunately, his brain was damaged on one side, and he lost the ability to move one side of his body. He became paralyzed on one side. Whose fault is this? Who was negligent? How should events be conducted on the field? Can first aid be given to the and protect him for preventing further injury? I'll give the answer to the question: never ever. Never ever give first aid for such injuries. Do not pull out the javelin. This has to be operated and removed. So negligence is there. Negligence, fortunately, not in the first aid. But this injury should not have occurred. It's most saddening, most tragic. A young boy happily reporting to school for an annual sports day gets a serious injury. Here is a boxing event many of us would remember. And you can identify Mike Tyson, and on this side, Evander Holyfield, and a very infamous picture where Mike Tyson bit off part of the ear of the other person. This is an injury that can be prevented. This is, of course, not amateur boxing, professional boxing. Can this be prevented? Could the referee have prevented this injury? Can this kind of injury be accepted by a violent sport like professional boxing? Did it satisfy the sadistic mentality of the onlookers, of the spectators? Did they, these are ethical questions, safety questions that I am asking. Did their applause and hooting increase the violence of the game, of the bout? So please think about it. This is an event from international gymnastics. A person does a vault and lands, breaks one leg. My question here, everything done perfectly. Will there be a fault on the side of on the organizers' side that this has happened in sport? Gymnastics, all of you know, can have this kind of events. But now what would be expected is, if you see whether there was negligence or not, would be the actions that follow this kind of fractures or this kind of accidents. So on the part of the organizers, nothing has gone wrong so far. I don't have any other picture of this guy. And now this is something that I want to show you. It's very important. Here is a goalkeeper diving to save the ball. And here is the forward charging and kicking. And the kick goes to the head of the goalkeeper. And the goalkeeper gets a very serious fracture of the skull. Could this have been prevented? If there's any negligence on the part of the referee, or is there a foul on part of the blue player? Can this be punished? Will there be a penalty kick awarded to this? Of course, the goalkeeper had to be removed to hospital. I just want you to think. It's not that something that you can step in and prevent at that moment of injury, but please think about it. These are only stimulating a thinking process in each of you. Now, this is again another boxing event with serious injuries. Now, this is, of course, as you can guess, it is not an amateur boxing event. There are no protective wear. So my question to you, can protective wear prevent serious injuries to the facial bones or to the teeth? We should be able to have the answer very soon. So we summarize this with the slide. I have given you more of practical practical situation where you have to find answers by yourself. And I have given you standard procedure for first aid. With this, I conclude my talk. I don't know whether there is time for questions. Anyway, I'll wait for the coordinator to respond. I thank each one of you for attending this online webinar. Thank you very much. I wish you all of the best. Please take adequate care in all your endeavors. Safety is paramount.
Thank you so much, sir. The session was so informative. Moreover, it was an ice-breaking for many of us. So without wasting time, we will move to the question answer session. Sir, we can identify a new trend that children or adults are more attracted towards playing on turf courts. So what is your comments over that?
How to adapt change of climate, is it? No, sorry, can you repeat the question?
Sure. So we can identify a new trend that children and adults are more attracted towards playing on turf courts, even without proper equipments. So is there any problem practicing on turf regularly?
Yes. Children should not actually, without proper training, proper turf should not participate in on play on turfs. The reason is children have something known as the growth plate. Children are growing. Their bone length will be increasing. That means each child, before reaching skeletal maturity, will have a portion of the bone. I'll take this example of this sanitizer bottle. See, this part of the bone is separate in a child. This cap, the flipping cap, here it is totally separate. That means this cap is a cartilage cap which will keep on moving up as the bone length increases. The child can very easily injure the cartilage. This portion, this junction can be injured very easily in a child. And once this growth cartilage is injured, it depends on the severity of the injury whether the person would have a growth defect. If this growing bone is seriously damaged, the bone will stop growing. And if it is an ankle joint, the foot will be shorter, the limb will be shorter. If it is the upper limb, he'll have a short forearm. So the growth part portion will not fuse until its maturity is reached. And that ranges from about 14 years to 18, 19 years. This period, until that about 18 years, until what we call a skeletal maturity is reached, these injuries are potentially serious and it will affect the growth of the child, and the child will regret having played on the turf after he becomes an adult. So better not to allow.
Okay, sir. So here we have the next question. Sir, is that recommended to have a sleep after meals for an athlete who is having competition at evening? Even if it is recommended, what should be the quantity of sleep?
It's better not to eat a very heavy meal before competition, because heavy meals will, number one, will stimulate sleep. That is one reason why you feel sleepy. If a light meal is taken, the sleep will not be stimulated. Second, sleep is, of course, for after a meal, sleep can be good, provided it is not a heavy meal. Again, heavy meals will not be digested in that time. So half an hour, I don't call that sleep. The best term to use that is nap, N-A-P. For a person expecting to participate in a competition, a nap is okay. Half an hour would be recommended. That is not, of course, I'm not very dogmatic about that half an hour. It's just an estimate that I'm giving you. But it's better to take a light meal which does not stimulate sleep. Next question.
Sir, there is a question from Mr. Vinod. Sir, what is the best site for checking pulse?
The best site for checking pulse is the carotids. The carotid pulse, each of you must check on one side of your body, just on the side of the neck. It is a very strong pulse. This pulse will be very strongly felt on any person. The problem with the person who's unconscious will have weak pulses, so you may not get the radial pulse or some other pulse easily felt. So without doubt, if you want to say whether the pulse is can be felt, is to use two fingers on the side of the neck to feel the carotid pulse. A warning that I want to give you here: never check the pulse of both sides simultaneously. It's like squeezing the neck. Only use two fingers on one side. Never simultaneously feel the pulse on two sides, both sides.
Okay.
Next question.
So what is the duration of ice application?
Ice application, preferably 15 to 20 minutes, but the ice must be covered in a cloth to prevent direct contact of ice cubes onto the skin, which may produce ice burns. So cover it in a piece of cloth, or if you don't have a cloth with you, take the sock, one sock of the athlete, and put it inside the sock. That's a very good container for ice, and then you apply it for 15 to 20 minutes.
Sir, there is a question from Ms. Shruti. Sir, what is shin splint and how it is different from stress fracture?
Shin splint is pain in the shin. That means the area between the knee joint and the ankle joint. Stress fracture is one of the causes of shin splint. Shin splint is like saying headache. It only means that the pain is in that area. Headache can be due to different reasons. So shin splint can be due to different reasons. So the pain in the shin is called shin splint, which is continuing for days. That is when we call a shin splint. And a stress fracture can be one of the reasons of, or one of the most serious reason for shin splints. Can I have the next question? Do we have first aid course available in India? Shall I take that question?
Yes, sir. One more question.
Yeah.
There is question. How to give CPR for a person with rib fracture?
Rib fracture, if you are sure that the person is having rib fracture, it's very difficult to give a CPR because the fractured rib will penetrate the heart. When we do CPR on a person who doesn't have a rib fracture, the rib can fracture because of the thrust of the CPR. That is accepted. It's an acceptable consequence of CPR. But when it is already fractured, quite obviously fractured, and the sharp end liable to penetrate the heart, then your CPR will kill the patient. So if it is on the heart, over the heart region that the rib is fractured and it is obvious that it is fractured, don't give CPR. You will push the broken rib into the bone. You will penetrate into the heart. It penetrate the heart and kill the patient. You rush the person to the hospital.
Okay, thank you, sir. So, in order to formally conclude the session,
Yeah, I'll just answer one or two questions here. How do we have first aid course available in India? Yes,
yes.
all Red Cross societies give first aid courses. Go to the Red Cross society in your city; they conduct first aid courses.
May I conclude, sir?
Yeah, that'd be fine.
Okay. So, on behalf of SAI LNCPE, Ministry of Youth Affairs and Sports, Hello India, and on behalf of all the participants, I extend a heartfelt thanks to our eminent speaker for his valuable session. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, once more, and good luck to all of you.